folks, Scott here with the new Hero Studio card kit of the month for July of 2024. This is the second month of the new Hero Studio. This is their card kit of the month. Let's dig right in. So right on the top here, we have this Hero Hues reactive palette. This is the Victorian seaside reactive palette with these great teals and yellows and pinks and purples. This is reactive ink, so it reacts with water. Always love the reactive palettes. Great for stamping, great for coloring with. This is our Victorian seaside stamp set. Some sky, some seas, some little cabanas. A happy birthday and thank you. Seize the day. Good pun. Thinking of you. Sending you waves of happiness and joy each day. This is a nice foreground stamp with a little bit of a fence and a life preserver. We've got some people here. Looks like this is a little girl, a little boy, a man and woman, and sisters maybe down here. A rowboat, a lighthouse is a little sand dollar. Oh my goodness, so much here. That is our Victorian seaside clear stamp set. Looks like we'll be stamping lots of scenes this month. Then we have 22 dies, 22 matching dies. Looks like these cut out virtually all of the images, including the sea, not the sky. Looks like we've got dies for the sentiments. And then we get a sandcastle fancy die that cuts out our sandcastle here. There's a pail and a shovel, a seashell, and a couple of flags. That'll be great fun to play with. And then we get a rock cling stamp. Look at that cling stamp. Hero Arts cling stamps are always just the best. Looks like we get to do some actual bona fide coloring this month. Let's color some rocks. And we also get 2 sheets of Hero Transfers map. This is a map. That's very interesting. Look at that soft lighthouse over there. Are these both the same? I think they're both the same. Yes, both the same. I just love that shaded lighthouse over there. Big map. This is Europe. We've got Spain, France, England over here. There's a bit of the African coast there. We also get a bunch of papers this month. We get 2 sheets each of blue, green, and purple vellum. This kind of has a nice little shimmer to it, but it's fairly see-through. Really interesting paper. 6 sheets, 3 colors. We also get some lava holographic paper and some rainbow holographic paper. I'm going to call this one the lava and this one the rainbow. Lovely holographic paper. Not sure how that works with our Victorian seaside, but we'll figure something out. And we also get some suggestions on the back of our Hero Studios card. There's 4 little ideas on how to use your stamps. Really cute. Let's go to the Victorian seashore for a little summer fun. And here are my 10 cards for the month. I'm sorry I'm so late this month. There was a bit of a mix-up at headquarters, and my kit didn't arrive till the 15th. So this is month number 2 of the new Hero Studio lineup of products and subscriptions for a variety of tastes and budgets. I did find it interesting that this kit combined silhouette stamps that are, oftentimes stamped in black with clouds and seashore, usually stamped in colors. I thought I'd avoid the black and the figures to start out with this kit. So for our first card, we have a Seize the Day card with a nice scene on that. Seize the Day, a great pun that's actually included in the kit. So on a piece of Nina Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, I stamped the clouds and the water using the Pool Party and the blue raspberry inks in the palette ink pad. I stamped the fence part of the foreground stamp and the footprints using Hero Hues sand ink and the boat using Hero Hues caramel ink. The lighthouse, the boat, the bird, just one, the sentiment are all stamped with Concord and 9th Dove ink. If I had my druthers, I would have done the fencing in caramel and the boat in sand, but this will work just fine. I wanted a little more height to the clouds, making them lower in the sky, so I ink blended blue raspberry above the stamp and tried to blend out the stamp line. And to add a little more color to the background, I reached for my Pebbles chalk palette. These are nice, soft chalk pastels from Pebbles. I reached for my chalk palette and softly blended in some sand and a little bit of the sky. I also added light touches of gray to the fence and brown to the boat so that they weren't pure white. I added some lights to the lighthouse with the lemon drop ink and a little micro applicator. I die cut the panel with the Hero Arts rounded rectangle infinity die and cut a mat from some dark gray cardstock using the next larger die. I ink blended some pumice stone distress ink around the edges of the stamped panel and glued that down to the gray mat. Both of those are then glued down to an A2 white card base with 1/4 inch rounded corners. I think all of these rounded corners feel very vintage to me. Now the scale of these stamps is a little specific. The lighthouse seems to work best in this position. And of course, the fence and the boat are meant to be in the foreground. But the sailboat can be far away where it looks like a real boat, or if you stamp that up close, it could be a toy boat. And Seize the Day, needless to say, is a great pun. I like using different colors with our silhouette stamps. We'll get into more of that too. As you know, I do try to use every stamp that's in a stamp set, including the sentiments. And I, of course, needed to see how black silhouettes would work with the more colorful, natural elements. And so we have Thinking of You card with our two little girls holding hands. So on a piece of ivory cardstock, I stamped the water and the sky with the same inks, trying for a little bit of a lighter hand by using blending brushes to soften the inks before stamping. I stamped all of the images using pitch black ink. I do like the coverage that pitch black ink gives us. And the foreground is just the right side of the foreground stamp, split left and right. So I just used this side of the foreground stamp and stamped the light preserver on this side, and then the other half, the weeds, on the other side. So that gave us a whole nother foreground stamp. And I added some stems to the bottom of the right side of the stamp under the life preserver here, because that was just flat on the stamp. Added some stems with a pigment micron pen that makes it look very much like the rest of that stamp. Now, I did have a problem with the water showing through the top of the life preserver here because it's stamped on top of the water. So I grabbed my P.H. Martin's bleed-proof white opaque watercolor and I filled in the preserver. I also went ahead and added some white to the stripes on the lighthouse to balance out the white on the life preserver. Well, that works well. So I die cut the inked panel with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die that's 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. I swiped the palette ink pad on a scrap of white cardstock, keeping the blues in the middle. So I just swiped this on a card, turned it the other direction, swiped it again, and die cut that with another Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. That's 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I glued those together and I added a thin ivory mat before gluing it all down to a white card base. Now, keeping the silhouettes in black is kind of stark, but it still works really nice for this buddy card. Thinking of You. I really like the bright stripy background on the back. Looks like a beach towel. Now, if you want to give your stamps a little more detail and color, you can actually color on your stamps directly with watercolor markers, and with the help of a stamping platform, you can get a good repeated impression. And of course, I am always interested in trying to stretch a stamp set that's apparently made for portrait into a landscape card. So our next card is Enjoy Each Day, with a colorful couple there in the middle and our seaside that goes clear across this landscape card. So using Tombow watercolor markers, I stamped the couple on some white cardstock. I used a stamp platform to repeat it until you get the desired amount of ink on the page. I thought these guys came out pretty well, so I die cut them with their matching die. And surprise, the die cuts them out individually. So I glued them together a little bit closer to each other. Romance. On a piece of white cardstock, I stamped the water twice, feathering out the edges where they would overlap. And that gave us a surf that covers the whole landscape card front. I stamped the fence using sandstone ink and the boat life preserver with a little sandstone at the bottom, and the row of cabanas using sand ink. So using my Tombow markers diluted with a little water, I painted in the fence, the boat very lightly, and the life preserver, and the cabanas. I used the foreground stamp and some micro applicators to add in more sandy footprints between the foreground stamps. You can see that little bundle of stones right there, or steps, is repeated a few times across there. I stamped the birds, only 4 of them, and the sailboat with Dove ink, and stamped the sentiment using sandstone ink. I die cut the panel with a rounded rectangle die and glued it to a craft card base. I did use a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen to add some sparkle to our water. And finally, I added our couple on front with some thin foam tape. I love the boat behind the fence here. I love it when you can actually layer up silhouette stamps to create some depth and dimension, and the colorful details of our romantic couple. And yes, with a little care, these stamps will work in a landscape orientation. Enjoy each day. So on the back of our studio kit card, it shows using the water stamp upside down in the opposite direction. Well, let's try that. So our next card is sending you waves of happiness. I stamped the upside down water on the right side of an ivory cardstock panel using the blue inks again, and I thought it might benefit with a more defined horizon line. So I masked off a horizon at the top edge of the stamp and ink blended Pool Party across the front of the card panel. I didn't try to cover up all the way to the bottom edge of the surf, but I did try to get to the farthest left edge of the stamp. Now, since we have a horizon, we should have some sun too. I've reversed the masking and used lemon drop ink to blend in a little sunshine and a small sun using masking with a hole punched out. That works really nice. Nice little sun there. I stamped the couple using pitch black ink and then stamped the kids next to them. That littlest kid fits between the two of them just perfectly. I stamped the seashells, the beach ball, and the toy sailboat, and the birds, all 5 of them, with pitch black ink, and I used a Pigment Micron pen to add more divots and textures around the stampings and the shore. That helps fill out this sandy area down here. I stamped the sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I embossed that with some clear embossing powder. I die cut the panel and the craft mat with Hero Arts rounded rectangle dies, glued them all down to an ivory card base with 1/4 inch rounded corners. I really love the family grouping here, and I think that water stamp works just fine in this orientation. I avoided layering stamping, so no touch-ups were needed, and I guess I was just simply eager for a nice definitive horizon line. Sending you waves of happiness. Now, though I use thank you cards probably more than any other cards I ever make, I couldn't think of a specific scene that would work for a thank you card. So I thought maybe some vignettes might convey the sentiment a little bit easier. And we have our thank you card. How about some nice monochromatic vignettes? I cut a piece of masking to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I die cut, I think I have it right here, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I die cut some 1 1/4 inch holes through the masking using a Hero Arts Circle Infinity die. I masked that down onto a piece of white cardstock, and I ink blended Pool Party through the holes. darker on the bottom left and fading out towards the top right. I stamped the 3 images inside the circles using the blue raspberry ink. I think the kids holding hands implies a connection. See the thinking of you card, there's a connection. And the boat kind of implies assistance, while the birds represent freedom or completion or all the things you think about when you're proffering your things to someone. I'm really trying here, folks. So I swiped some blue raspberry ink around the edges of another panel of white cardstock, added some random spots of clear embossing powder for a bit of a watery shine. I die cut both panels with, again, the Hero Arts rounded rectangle dies and glued them to a white card base with 1/4-inch rounded corners. And this clean and simple monochrome arrangement works very well as a thank you card. Thank you. So that's 5 of our 6 sentiments. We only have the happy birthday sentiment left. Now, I've used all of the image stamps, so let's jump into the Sandcastle Fancy dies for our birthday card. And of course, we have to break out the Hero Arts sand embossing powder. I know almost everybody has some of this sand embossing powder. I have a good amount of that sand embossing powder on hand, so I decided to cover a panel of cardstock with some score tape. I used a 6-inch by 6-inch sheet of score tape, and I covered the sticky side with embossing powder and heat set it. That gave me a whole panel of sandy cardstock to use. I die cut that sandcastle 4 times from that sheet for some 3-dimensional layering. So for card number 6, we have our happy birthday card. Look at the dimension on that sandcastle. I love that. Look at the shine of that embossing powder. The back layer is the full castle with the upper doorways cut out and backed with the blue vellum. For the next layer, I cut off the 3 towers and the 3 doorways. For the third layer, I cut off the side pieces and the center door, and then I cut out the front rampart and the door for the 4th piece. I colored all of the edges of all of the die cuts with a dark brown alcohol marker and used thin foam tape to stack them all together. Now, I can't imagine a better way to use this die. I die cut the flags from more of the sand embossed paper, and I die cut the pennants from some lemon drop ink swiped on some watercolor cardstock and glued the pennants to the sand posts and then behind the side towers. I grabbed my Gina K Design Oval Stitch dies, both small and large, to die cut these ovals. I find it incredibly hard to line up oval die cuts, but these dies make it easy because you line up the smaller oval with the stitched lines on the larger oval. So it almost takes the guesswork out of layering a mat on an oval. I die cut a little sand hill with a stitched hillside die and the small oval die. I colored the top edge with brown and I glued that to the ivory background. I die cut the bucket from a swatch of blue raspberry on watercolor paper and the shovel from Pool Party swatch on the same watercolor paper. Here's all these pieces swatch on watercolor paper that I die cut. I die cut another panel of ivory cardstock with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die that's 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches, and I ink blended walnut stained distress oxide ink around the edges before gluing that to an A2 white card base. I stamped the sentiment on a scrap of ivory cardstock with the same ink, embossed that with some clear embossing powder, and die cut it with the matching die. I also die cut the seashell from the sandpaper too. So I decided we needed a birthday candle to drive home this sentiment. So I turned to the My Monthly Hero May of 2024 card kit. This was the last My Monthly Hero kit, and I stamped a striped candle on a scrap of white cardstock. I colored that with my Tombow markers and fussy cut it out, including a little wick to keep the flame attached. And I glued that to the back of the center sand tower. Now the ovals with the hill are glued to the card front. Then the castle with the flags and the candle is glued to the center of the oval. I used a white gel pen on the rim of the bucket and glued the shovel inside before adding those and the shell to the bottom right here with foam tape. And finally, the sentiment is added with more foam tape up left. I really love that die and the sand embossing powder especially, and I love this beachy birthday card. Happy birthday! So now I've used all of the stamps in our stamp set, including all of the sentiments, and I've used all of the fancy dies, so now I guess it's all on me. So for our next card we have I'd Be Lost Without You, with that great lighthouse stamp. I was really itching to make that lighthouse red and white, and after coloring the people stamp, I realized that I could do the same with the lighthouse stamp. I stamped the lighthouse in the center of a panel of Nina White cardstock using my Tombow markers and my Misty stamp platform. This stamp was easier to color than the couple was, and I'm very pleased with the overall effect. I created this sentiment using my Silhouette software and the Dream State font, and I printed that directly on the stamped panel. I die cut the panel with a LDRS fancy rectangle die and die cut some of the lava holographic cardstock with the matching larger die and glued them together. The lava cardstock gives us a nice sense of watery reflection. I took a card base of ivory cardstock and I stamped the rock cling stamp on the front using frayed burlap distress oxide ink. Now, a lighthouse is supposed to protect you from the rocky coastline. So I glued the matted layers to the stamped card front and finally added some lemon drop ink in the lighthouse window and the beacon. You know how much I love white space and vignettes, so this card thrills me to no end. I'd be lost without you. So that rock cling stamp is good for a background, especially considering those rocks are kind of large. But I wondered if I could make the rocks work all by themselves. So for our next card, we've got You Rock My World with a fancy cut edge detail takes this cling stamp one extra step. Now, I used some Ranger mixed media cardstock in ivory for this card. I stamped the cling stamp on a 6x6 inch panel using antique linen distress oxide ink, and then I lightly double stamped it with frayed burlap distress oxide ink. Then, using a damp paintbrush, I pushed some of the stamp ink around to give some color variation to the rocks. I mainly went over the stamped lines and detail, but I didn't scrub so hard as to erase the stamping. Here's the other half that I did. This is just pushing around the stamped ink with some water and a paintbrush, which that gives you a nice tone to the rocks, but that wasn't quite enough for me. I thought we needed some shadows. So I used pumice stone distress ink with a paintbrush and colored in all of the shadows and spaces between the rocks. I kept the shadows to the lower left, hoping to add some extra dimension to this stamp. I traced a line following the rocks that were whole, meaning they weren't behind another rock, down the center of the card from top to bottom, and I fussy cut the stamped panel in two. I die cut the other three sides with an A2 sized Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. I took an ivory mixed media card base and I traced the cut line of the rocks on the front panel and fussy cut the edge of the card base. Then I just glued the stamped panel to the card front, matching all the edges. I printed the sentiment using my Silhouette software and the Arial black font. I printed that on a scrap of matching ivory cardstock, and I die cut it with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. Now, there are a number of fun rock sentiments out there that would work quite well with this unique cling stamp. You Rock My World, with a fun, fancy cut edge on the front of your card. I like that the sentiment goes completely across. Now, I was having a hard time figuring out how to use the Map Hero transfer sheets, the rub-ons, with this kit. So I grabbed a bunch of my pre-experiments I did with this kit and created a pseudo multimedia card using the rub-ons. And we have Don't Get Tied Down. It's another little vignette card and a decent little pun here. The map transfer sheet actually works pretty well in this arrangement. I tried to use the part of the rub-on that has as few place names as possible. That turns out to be the top left over here. So I avoid the France and Spain and Atlantique and everything. I went ahead and used the top left part of the rub-on sheet on an A2 panel of white cardstock, and I set it aside. Now, I also realized that you can actually stamp and emboss on the vellum sheets in this kit. When I was playing around with the Rock Cling stamp, I stamped it on some of the purple vellum using unicorn white ink, and I embossed that with some white embossing powder. The embossing stayed on the vellum quite nicely. Now, I wasn't sure what to do with that when I did it, so I just set it aside. Not quite the makings of a multimedia card. So I stamped the boat on a scrap of white cardstock using Hero Arts caramel ink, and I die cut it out using the matching die. Now, using a Hero Arts square infinity die, I cut another piece of the lava holographic cardstock to 2 1/4 inches square and matted that on a 2 3/8 inch square of the blue vellum. I die cut the rock embossed vellum to 3 inches square and glued the 3 layers together. I trimmed the map panel to 3 1/2 inches by 4 3/4 inches, matted that on a thin ochre cardstock, and then down to a white card base. I decided to add the square layers towards the top of the card front instead of in the middle, and all we need is a sentiment. I printed this greeting using my Silhouette software and the Times New Roman and Dream State fonts. I trimmed that down to a simple banner and mounted both it and the boat to the card front with thin foam tape. Again, that lava cardstock gives a great impression of water, and the vellum is a little shiny too. And I like how the embossed rocks and the map rub-on play off each other. I also like that you can still see the "Here Be Monsters" parts of the map. Tied down indeed. Don't get tied down. Now, I had experimented with the palette reactive ink pad when I started playing with this kit. I swiped it on some watercolor cardstock, but it absorbed so quickly into that it was hard to get it to blend. I also swiped it on some multimedia cardstock, and it moved a little bit easier, though still not very much. Finally, I grabbed some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I swiped the palette ink on that, and I wiggled it back and forth a little bit, and on that cardstock, the inks blended with no help at all. Look at that green and that orange. Literally no water was used on this background, and we have a Cabana Boy Wanted card. That background is just kind of amazing. I just love it. I trimmed the ink panel to 3 3/4 inches to 2 1/2 inches. I stamped the water on the left using unicorn white ink embossed with white embossing powder. I stamped the footprints using the Concord and Ninth Dove ink. And I also used the Dove ink to stamp the cabanas on my swatched watercolor paper. Instead of making them rainbows, I followed the lemon drop line of the ink, and I die cut the cabanas using the matching die. I printed this fun sentiment on a scrap of white cardstock using my Silhouette software and the stencil font. I trimmed that to size using a lawn fawn stitched rectangle die. I cut another piece of the lava holographic cardstock to, this is 4 1/8 by 2 7/8, and I glued the colored panel on top of that. Now, I was looking through my scraps for some dark gray cardstock, and I found this die-cut stamp piece already cut out in the right color, perfect for the last layer. I glued everything to a white card base, added the cabanas and the sentiment with foam tape. I just love that background. I might have to take some of our other palette ink pads to that Bristol Smooth cardstock and see how they do. I love the white caps of the water on the blues. I think that's perfectly beachy. This card makes me laugh. Cabana Boy Wanted. I'm in the cabana waiting. So that wraps up my 10 cards inspired by the Hero Studio Card Kit of the Month for July of 2024. I did manage to use every stamp in our stamp set. I used all of the fancy dies. I used some of the rub-on transfers and a good amount of the specialty papers. Of course, the cling stamp, and of course, the ink. This is a fun variety of summer at the beach cards. I think the Victorian seaside stamp set is quite versatile, and that sandcastle die and cling stamp are great stash builders. I enjoyed coming up with so many ways to use these supplies this month. This kit is still available at Hero Arts. If something here has caught your eye or your imagination, you should go grab a kit for yourself before they are all sold out. If you do go shopping at Hero Arts, please use my links in the description down below. It helps support this channel at no cost to you, is always supremely appreciated. Thank you for spending some time with me here today. Your attention and encouragement are always appreciated. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did this month. Let me know which cards are your favorite, and please, if you like this video, please take a moment to click the thumbs up at the top. Be sure and send me a comment. Share these cards on your Facebook and Pinterest pages. Post this to all your crafty friends and neighbors. Remember, don't run with scissors. I send you and yours love and light, and happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.